The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Paige Pierce is Nanaimo's new Youth Poet Laureate. The Vancouver Island University education student will spend a 2-year term raising awareness of poetry and the impact that literary arts can have on community life. The 21-year-old has 7 published books of poetry, the first of those coming when she was 15. CHLY reporter Mick Sweetman caught up with Pierce for a conversation in our studio.
Can you just tell me a bit about how you got started in poetry?
Yeah, for sure. So I was always a big reader. I sort of inherited that trait from my mother, who's also a huge bookworm. And I took a bunch of writing classes in high school. So I totally attribute all of my poetry abilities and all of that to a class that I took from grades 9 to 12. It was a creative writing class. And I just really loved it. We didn't do a ton of poetry exploration, but I had other friends in that class that were really into it. So I picked up a few books from the bookstore and I really found myself drawn to it. And you know how being a teenager is, especially a young teenager. So I thought that it was a really good escape method and coping mechanism for sort of the trials and tribulations of being a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl living in the modern world. So I really read a lot of poetry before I started writing it, and then I started with really terrible prose that I would post on these little writer blogs on the internet. And slowly I started finding my voice a little bit. I found a couple of books that I really liked the structure and style of, and I started to imitate those a little bit with my own writing until I landed where I am now. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
And my understanding is you actually published your first book of poetry at 15. How was that?
It was a bit crazy. I didn't mean to publish it, which is, I know, a little bit strange for me to say, and people often ask me, how did you accidentally publish a book? But what I had done was I had put all of my poetry into a collection on Blurb, which is the publisher that I use, and they had a platform that I could download onto my computer and a software that I could use to edit and format my book. And then basically all I wanted out of it was to have a copy of my collection of poetry in my hands. I didn't really realize when I was submitting it to the Global Retail Distribution Network that it was going to be in bookstores. And my family was actually in Portland, Oregon for my little brother's soccer tournament down there. And I started getting emails from retailers and my publishing team and whatever. And they had said that it had been picked up by Barnes & Noble, Amazon, that sort of thing, and then Indigo chapters soon after. And I kept working with that same method because it worked for me. And I'm lucky enough to have a small but very loyal readership that I still test all my poetry out on, and that's where I'm at today. And
in terms of youth right now who might be looking to start poetry, or maybe they have started poetry, but they're kind of looking to take it to the next level, what sort of advice would you give them?
I would say the more you engage with poetry and the more you interact with it, the better your writing is going to be and the stronger and sharper your voice will be. My biggest advice is read poetry, watch videos of poetry readings online, and the more you take in, the better work you can put out, as well as just practicing writing. If you have a line in your head, I do this all the time. My notes app in my phone is full of just one-off lines that may or may not ever turn into anything. But any sort of lyrical or prosaic thought you have, write it down, because you never know when you're going to come back to it and it'll turn into a piece. One of my favorite poems I ever wrote started out, I was driving to work one day and I had 2 lines in my head that just kept swirling over and over. So when I got into the parking lot, I wrote them in the notes app in my phone, and then it ended up being the title poem for my latest book. So never discard any writing. You can always come back to it and edit it later.
Can you maybe give our listeners a sense of kind of like I guess your journey through poetry, like we talked about how you started, but what's it like what are the steps you've had to take to kind of get to this point?
I would say when I first started out, I was writing a lot of short fiction and things of that sort. And then I went into prose a little bit more, which is less lyrical, often has less structure. And then I went into a bit more structured poetry. I still don't really use rhyme schemes or things, but you have to start to understand the things that you like to read and the things that make sense in your head. So for me, I've never really liked poetry that has any rhyme scheme. It's just my personal preference. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but I really like free verse and free form poetry. And I found that I started reading a lot of it. And then I was playing with lines in my head that I had, and I would write it down and I would start to do a poem. And if I didn't really like the way that it was sounding, I'd leave it for a while and come back to it. That is a big piece of advice I have, is you don't have to finish it in one sitting. And a lot of the times I will just sit down and write a poem and I won't come back to it until it's time to publish. But if you have fragments of poems, you can always come back to them. It doesn't have to look the exact same way every time you come back to it either. And and then just kind of research writers that you like and the poetry industry and publishing and all that sort of stuff. I self-published. I've never had to pay for publishing, thankfully. I did have a contract with a publisher in New York when I was really young for my second book. But you kind of have to look into the different offsets of traditional publishing as well. Some publishers will ask that you put up money up front and then you get paid back through your royalties. Some traditional publishers will give you an advance and then you get paid out once you've earned out of your royalties. And some basically you won't pay for anything, they won't pay you. And then as soon as you start making money, they start making money, or vice versa. With self-publishing, I had complete control over how my books looked as well, which was really important to me, as well as the structure of my poems, the order of my poems. So I guess in short, the steps would be read lots of poetry, write everything that you can, and try to find a platform that works for you, because it's not always going to be the same recipe for everyone.
Can you just give, because I'm actually not sure, but like what does a youth poet laureate do? Like, what are your plans for this position?
Honestly, when I first applied for it, I was student teaching at NDSS, and I was at lunch in my English classroom, came over the announcement, so I talked to the teacher librarian about it, and she gave me a bit more info on it, and then I went through a whole process. And my plans for the role essentially are, I'd love to develop some youth poetry programming in the city of Nanaimo, specifically in the summertime when everybody's schedules open up a little bit. So that basically could look like doing some poetry workshops that are led by me or facilitated by me, because I'm obviously not the expert, and I'm going to come across a ton of poetry, I'm sure, that will just blow me out of the water. So I want to do some youth outreach, some community outreach, culminating in some poetry cafes or even poetry slam events, and basically just form a bit of a community of writers, and have it open to any youth that's interested in poetry. You don't have to have any background in it at all. Everybody has to start somewhere. So that's basically my plan. And I know that they have a couple of readings scheduled for me, or in the works, I suppose. So I'm excited to see what this looks like. I've got 2 years to make something out of it. So
great.
We'll see.
Like, is part of the idea to kind of like document the experience of youth in the city?
I suppose that's part of it. Yeah, for sure. I think that basically the main goal is going to be just to start a bit of a community and do some outreach of young writers and young poets, and to introduce poetry to Nanaimo in a way that feels accessible and is not intimidating and all of that sort of thing. So it doesn't have to necessarily be poetry about living in the area, although we would love to have a focus on community and the natural environment that we're so lucky to have around us. But yeah, anything that the youth have to say, I will listen and I will help them write their feelings, and I'm very excited about it.
You're listening to Midcoast Morning. Right now we're hearing a conversation between CHLY reporter Mick Sweetman and Nanaimo's new youth poet laureate, Paige Pierce. The 21-year-old will spend a 2-year term raising awareness of poetry in the community.
And you're actually going to VIU as a education student, so you're going to be a teacher. Why did you choose that program and that kind of career pathway, as opposed to, taking English literature and like more on maybe even poetry?
Yeah, I would say that I did my first 2 years at North Island College with a semester online at Thompson Rivers University as well. And I really loved the literature classes I was in and the history classes I was in. So at VIU right now, I'm studying to be a secondary school social studies and English teacher. So anything from 8 to 12, anything that has to do with English or social studies, history, that sort of thing. VIU was nice because I'm super close to my family, and my parents still live in Campbell River, and a lot of my family still lives in the North Island. So it was close to home. The campus is not super huge, which is awesome because I'm totally the type of person that gets lost really easily. And yeah, all the professors I've encountered so far have been so kind and welcoming and open to questions and feedback and things like that. So I think that the small campus was really good for me. I didn't want to be in a huge bustling city. As for the education program over the English program or the history program, I have friends that are doing the opposite direction as me. One's an English major right now and one's a history major, and they're going to go back and do their post-bac program after they've got their bachelor's degrees. For myself, I want to just get out there as soon as possible. The VIU program I'm doing is the 5-year Bachelor of Education, so you get your teaching license and your bachelor's degree out of it. So yeah, basically we have a bunch of practicum happening. I'm starting practicum up in a couple of weeks. I've already done one. It's been excellent, and I feel really supported by the education program, which is really nice because I know that that's not always the case. So I think that the small university and the education program and just how ingrained it is with the local school districts and such has been really good for me, and I have had an excellent experience so far.
Would you be able to read some poetry?
Oh, yeah, of course. All right, so this one is called Nan's Pasta Recipe. I read an excellent poem in a terrible book about a woman's Amazon cart as she begins to wither away with cancer. I think of your star sign and the 26th of June, how you didn't get to prepare, or maybe you did when your Google searches list chronic pain among trucks for your grandson and 100 shades of Skechers. I have kept myself busy to avoid your leaving. People tell me how sorry they are that I have to live without you, when they've done it for all of their years. I say, yeah, thank you, and change the topic. Tonight, I have curled up on my couch in the emptiness of this quiet house, look at tattoos of elephants, plan where I'll put your handwriting as it is engraved below my skin, where I've been storing my grief and where you kept your secrets. The pantry light is on 5 days short of my 21st birthday. You wanted to go to Vegas, and we settled on somewhere in the United Kingdom. That Ireland trip was only a few years away. I stir the macaroni, holding back a sob, or maybe just a stomach ache that I haven't managed to cure. Mom and I FaceTime every night. We categorize our morning into wimpy days, as if our heartache was prescribed by a mood swing or the agonies of womanhood, and not the shadow of your essence that we keep hoping to see peeking around sullen corners. I lift the tomato sauce out of the fridge. People tell me I make pasta weird, but they haven't heard the clink of a scoop against your vintage cookware, the bubble of 8 minutes worth of nourishment in your sunflower kitchen. I just put up a Van Gogh, and I see your approval in the reflection of my face. In the department store frame, I see your nose and laugh in the fog of my glasses, as muscle memory takes over in my state of hysteria. Put my dinner into the oven until the top is golden, serve in a giant bowl, and think to myself, this is not the same as Nan's.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Was that autobiographical at all?
Yeah, unfortunately, my Nan passed away in November, and we were very close. She was probably one of my best friends in my life, and she had a huge hand in raising my younger brother and I. So dealing with the grief has been an interesting process. I know that I'm very lucky at 21 to only have lost one grandparent, but it was definitely a big one for me, and so I think that it comes and goes in waves, and I can't necessarily predict what my grief is going to look like on any given day. We're definitely a family of compartmentalizers, so I tend to just keep myself busy, but as you can tell in that poem, you know, there are lots of things that remind me of my Nan. I mean, I'm wearing her sweatshirt as we do this interview and everything, so I try to summon her spirit and her essence in everything that I do, and even though I make pasta weird, it's what my Nan would have done, so I hope that she would have been proud of how my weird macaroni and cheese turned out, and, you know, also the last 2 months and how I've been dealing with her loss, so. Yeah,
I'm so sorry for your loss. Can you talk a bit about that, a bit about like how you use poetry to kind of like deal with these emotions and the feelings that you're experiencing?
Yeah, totally. So when I was first starting out, I was very lucky to have an amazing set of friends, and my parents were very supportive, and I had, you know, a very good childhood. I was very lucky to grow up around such incredible nature and people and sense of community up in Campbell River. But the first poetry that I was writing was just, you know, the issues that any teenage girl would have, which mostly is boys and body image, the two B's that nobody wants to deal with. But so I found that back then I was never really good at journaling because I would kind of lose the plot of what I was trying to say and I would get too tangled up in the words. So with poetry, I sit down and I say, this is what I want to say, and it doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody but me. Later in my life, obviously, as I started to get into forming a sense of identity and moving away from my family for the first time, and maneuvering adult relationships and grief and all that sort of thing and looking at what my future should look like, I started to take all of my confusion and mixed feelings and just sort of lost energy, I would say, and put it into my poetry. So I use it as a coping mechanism for sure, and it has really helped me through my life, and I don't think that I would be doing teaching or I would be reading as much or I would really be anywhere close to where I am right now if I didn't have that as a way to cope with all of the things that were going on in my life.
So how can people, either find your poetry or how can they kind of like find the work that you're going to be doing as the Youth Poet Laureate?
Yeah, so my own personal poetry you can find at any major bookstore online, including Indigo, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart, and lots of indie shops around here especially. The work that I'm doing with the Poet Laureate position, or the Youth Poet Laureate position, is keep an eye on the City of Nanaimo's website. We're going to be having some information posted on there as I start to develop what this role is going to look like for me and what the programming is going to look like. I would say you could follow my social media, but being a teacher, I had to lock everything down, so don't try to do that. But the city's website, and you can Google me. Make sure you put Paige Pierce Books or Paige Pierce Author, though, because I do have a name twin that's a very famous disc golfer, and she steals all my internet thunder. So, yeah. Have a look around the internet. I'm sure that there'll be lots of stuff that the city's going to be sharing on their social media platforms and their website. So that would be your best resource moving forward.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Nanaimo's new Youth Poet Laureate, Paige Pierce, in conversation with CHLY reporter Mick Sweetman. Pierce will be working under Nanaimo's Poet Laureate, Kamal Parmar. When we come back, we'll hear Parmar reflect on her time in the role so far.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
We're talking local poetry on today's show. Kamal Parmar was appointed Nanaimo's Poet Laureate in summer 2021. She's more than 2/3 of the way through her tenure, which will wrap up around the end of this summer. We spoke on Midcoast Morning back when she was first appointed, and I was excited to have the chance now to follow up and learn how things have been going.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kamal Parmar. My friends and family and everybody calls me as Kamal. I'm the Poet Laureate of the City of Nanaimo. And I think it's a great honor and a privilege to work with, such an artistic and creative community like ours in Nanaimo. We have lots and lots of published and emerging poets out here. So, it's just a wonderful experience.
Well, thank you so much for making some time to speak with me. And I should say welcome back to Midcoast Morning. We spoke on this program 2 years ago when you were appointed. Yes. And at the time, you told me your main goal, your hope was to focus on poetry as a healing tool. Have you been able to do that?
I think so. I've been able to connect with the poets. I did a couple of readings and presentations on poetry as a healing tool. In fact, I did have a panel discussion quite some time back in the library the Nanaimo North Library on poetry as a healing tool. And I had some interesting poets. There was Ian Cognito, Kim Goldberg, Sonnet Lab, to name a few. And so we had a very interesting take. Everyone gave their own sort of take about how poetry helps them heal and gives them calmness and soothing and look inward. So it was very interesting, and the audience also enjoyed it. So a very informative session, but very interactive.
And maybe on that note, what would your take be on explaining to folks how poetry is a healing tool for you?
I think that poetry helps me create a certain stillness in me, which creates calmness, and it's like a chasm to bridge our writing with the world. I often feel that life is made of poetry. In fact, when poetry connects with nature, which I really focus on, it's an extension of yourself and heals us inside out. So each line of poetry that I write gives me some kind of vitality, and it's a powerful tool. It gives me a calmness, peace, especially, I was Poet Laureate during the pandemic times, and then, that was a really stressful period for all. And poetry was kind of a balm, healing balm, and I sought refuge in the words.
It's interesting you mentioned nature there. Earlier on the program, we heard from Paige Pierce, who's just been appointed Nanaimo's new Youth Poet Laureate. She mentioned that was something she was hoping to work in as well. She's just getting started as the Youth Poet Laureate. What advice would you maybe give to her as someone who's been the Poet Laureate for a couple of years in Nanaimo?
I would say, since she's going to target the youth and the younger section, and she has a lot of a good support in the university or high school, she should look to, towards giving them workshops and asking them to come out. There are lots and lots of budding young poets who write, privately, but they don't want to sort of read out their whatever their writings are in public, thinking, hey, I'm not that good, or people might say, they're not confident. So I want her to sort of build that confidence and ask the students and youngsters to come out and read and to encourage them. Down the road, I discussed this with the city. We plan to have a high school poetry reading competition where we select the best. It'll be kind of inspiring and encouraging to the youth. And I want to sort of see that that's one of my ideas that I want to pass on to her.
Was there maybe one moment that stood out to you from your time as Nanaimo's Poet Laureate?
Yes, I can recall. I did a reading at a seniors' residence in Nanaimo, and while I was reading, a senior citizen came up to me and she had tears in her eyes. She says, I'm going to take this book of yours and hug it and read it almost every day. So that was a very moving experience, because people relate to what one writes. It's their life. They identify themselves, and that's where the healing lies.
I'd maybe like to open up some space for you to share a poem with me today. Is there anything in particular you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would. Yes, certainly. I'd also like to add, that during my 2 years, say thanks to the community, that I was able to connect with lots and lots of community members, way in Victoria, Parksville, on Gabriola Island, where I was literally moved by the amount of art out there, especially poetry. Then all around the island, I've been doing lots of readings and, getting people to come out and write. So there was a program I did, Ekphrastic Poetry Contest, with part of the Nanaimo Art Council, where we paired paintings and poems together. So that really hit off well with the public. So my thanks to them for cooperating and support. Okay, so I won't take too much of your time. So this is my poem, freshly written, and we just had the first snowfall. So the title is The First Snowfall, so I think it's quite apt with what the nature has gifted to us. In the pale glimmer of moonlight, the landscape lies still, quilted in soft white snow that had fallen all day, transforming Nanaimo into a winter fairyland. The dimpled earth is strangely quiet, as if in meditation. Curls of smoke arise from my floral coffee mug. I look up at the horizon. Frigid arbutus stand naked. Snow-dusted conifers and cypress taper towards a gray, somber sky that spells drifting snow. Snow-speckled hills arise, as if to say something, their tongues muted. Mist-swaddled Mount Benson arises, stately with its white cape, while the west coast lies in quiet slumber, dreaming of summer that is now a thing of the past. There is silence and expectancy, a stillness casting a magic spell on me, drawing me closer. I look unblinkingly, mesmerized by this winter wonderland. Thank you.
Kamal Parmar is Nanaimo's Poet Laureate. That's our story for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you would like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.